Hi, I'm Eric Jacobson, Business Growth Specialist with iConnection. iConnection is a website design and website marketing agency. I'm also the founder of Manufacturer Insights. I'm pleased today to have as our guest speaker Michael Hoover, who is the Director of Time and Labor Management for TrustPoint. TrustPoint is a provider of a scalable HR and payroll platform for small and mid-sized manufacturers. Hi, Michael. Thanks for being here today.
Hi, Eric. Glad to be here.
Our topic for today is weighted average overtime calculations. Michael, my first question for you is, why is this a topic that manufacturers should even care about?
It's really relevant, Eric, in that a lot of times manufacturers oversee the need to incorporate shift differentials and bonuses into their overtime calculation for their employees. And by not doing this, opens them up to audits and penalties if they are not in compliance with the FLSA rules that carry forth that calculation.
So, what are some of the risks that manufacturers have if they're not understanding these calculations and implementing them properly?
The first and the most obvious is compliance. There are strict FLSA rules that go with overtime calculations. Uh, First, we need to establish what overtime is. The manufacturer has a work week, and the work week needs to be defined. It can start from a Sunday or a Wednesday, but it needs to be defined ahead of time. And we need to establish that it's in that work week is 40 hours. Now, if an employee picks up an additional shift and they have a shift differential where they get paid more for that additional shift, that needs to be taken into consideration for the overtime calculation. Additionally, the manufacturer also needs to take into consideration any sort of spot bonus that is given to the employee if they pick up that shift. So anything that is non-discretionary, anything a shift pickup bonus or a performance bonus or even an attendance bonus needs to be taken into consideration for that overtime calculation.
So, I would imagine, in the work that you do, you're working with small to mid-size manufacturers. I would imagine you've come across some situations that make for interesting storytelling. Can you think of an example of one?
One of the most common ones that we see is, first of all, the manufacturers will often pay the overtime where worked. And that's a big pitfall that can come back to bite you if you're not paying the employee accordingly. So if the employee gets the overtime where worked and it's not taking into consideration any of those bonuses or any of those shift differentials, it can pull down the employee's overtime calculation. And if the manufacturer gets an audit, that can open up for additional compliance and penalties from the federal government.
So, Michael, this isn't just for manufacturers. They're not the only ones that need to be concerned about this. Is that correct?
That's correct. So this applies to any company in any industry, whether they're small or large, or any industry is applicable to these rules. So some of the compliance risks that the organization is subject to are repaying any back wages for the employees that aren't covered for that weighted average overtime. There are also penalties that come with that. So a typical penalty would be over $2,000 per violation if the organization is willfully non-compliant with this or for repeated violations. And then, of course, there's also the reputational impact as well for the organization.
What do you mean by the reputational impact?
If this becomes public knowledge and it affects their recruitment and retention for employees, if this becomes a public matter
Mm. So it can impact their ability to attract and
and retain.
potentially keep existing workers. So,
Yes, because what happens is when they do an audit and an investigation, they'll go all the way back as far as they can to recoup any damages, any lost wages, and then there's penalties. So those penalties can be double if they are found to be non-compliant.
mm. Who typically in the organization, uh, let's say it's a manufacturer, is responsible for this?
Typically, for small to mid-sized businesses and manufacturers, it is the HR director or the CFO that is responsible for tracking and managing and making sure they stay in compliance.
Michael, I just wanted to go back to we talk about obvious that overtime is a concern. How about things like bonuses or any other types of compensation? How does that fit into this picture?
That's correct. That's absolutely right. So anything that is a non-discretionary bonus or a spot bonus to have an employee pick up a shift, that needs to be calculated into that overtime calculation as well. So it's not just a shift differential. It's not just a flat rate change. Any type of performance bonus or an attendance bonus or a shift pickup bonus needs to be incorporated into that overtime calculation.
So before we dive deeper into this, you had talked about some of the risks that a manufacturer has. What are some of the benefits of getting this right?
Some of the benefits is not only does it mitigate any risk as far as investigation in just an individual, and then that opens it up into the entire organization, but also fair and balanced work rules that really creates a more attractive recruitment tool to get the benefit, get the best employees that are available on the market.
Mm. And certainly for manufacturers, being able to hire is so important right now. It can be a struggle. Michael, I think now would be a good time for you to dig in. So, how do you go about calculating the weighted average overtime?
Great question. So what we do is we take the employee's base rate and we incorporate in not only the overtime rate, but we also need to incorporate the different rate for picking up a different shift, as well as the shift pickup bonus. This is just an example, but in this example, we have an employee that works a total of 45 hours. Now, 30 of the hours are at a $15 per hour rate. So that brings us to $450. They pick up another shift at $20 per hour for 15 hours. So that's $300. And then they get a shift pickup bonus of $75. So we need to calculate all of that at the initial base rate plus the shift bonus. That brings us to $825. And then we divide that to get an adjusted base rate of $20.62 per hour. Then we calculate our overtime amount based upon that rate. So we have $20.63 times 1.5, which is the overtime rate, time and a half, times the 5 hours, which is the overtime that they initially got, which is in excess of 40 hours. That brings us to $154.69 for their overtime compensation.
When you did the discussion, when it was $20.62, they don't round up to 63.
They do. You can either bring it, you can calculate it out to hundredths, or you can round it up. You can't round it down. So you can round it up as long as it's in favor of the employee.
So, do you see a lot of manufacturers are doing these calculations manually, or this is where TrustPoint comes in, with a system that can help them?
As you can imagine, it would be simple enough to calculate it for possibly 5 or 10 employees, but with most manufacturers, it becomes too onerous and too manual of a calculation to do. That's where we come in and we have our tools which can calculate that information automatically. Not only the shift differentials and that sort of thing, but also any bonuses that are calculated into that as well are incorporated into that overtime calculation.
I'd like to take a step back just for a minute, and I really didn't give you a chance to talk about TrustPoint. Who is TrustPoint? What are they all about? Where are they located? Tell us a little bit about that.
Thank you. TrustPoint is a 10-year-old company. We specialize in providing payroll, timekeeping, and HR solutions to help businesses manage their workforce efficiently. More specifically, we offer recruitment tools, applicant tracking, onboarding, benefit enrollment, all to make the employee's role easier in the company. So the employee can go in and self-select their benefits. It can update their carrier for any dependency changes. The system also provides performance reviews, asset management, time, scheduling. That's all incorporated within the same platform to make not only the employee's role easier, but also streamlines and makes more efficient the HR provider as well.
So that's great, Michael. That's a great segue for our next topic, which is, how does a manufacturer stay compliant? What are the steps that they need to take to make sure they're compliant with the regulations?
So the best and most effective way to stay compliant with these rules and regulations is to implement an automated payroll solution that can track this for you rather than having to manually calculate these. The tool that we use and implement here is UKG Ready, and that will calculate the employees' weighted average overtime automatically and accurately. The other method is to audit regularly. Now the system will automatically audit that for you as well, and it will create reporting and audit trails for all the changes and time tracking that's in the system. Another method is to train and educate your team on how the weighted average overtime calculations and rules work. And then lastly, of course, you would want to consult with experts, work with your legal and compliance professionals to make sure that you're in compliance with the latest FLSA rules.
Speaking of the latest rules, as with any new rules that come out, there are typically court challenges that can impact the rollout of those. Is there anything going on currently that you're aware of that may be impacting the implementation of these regulations?
That's just the thing, Eric, is these rules are constantly changing and constantly getting updated. So that's why we want to make sure that we have a professional organization that is keeping track of these things, and the software as well is able to handle those rule changes that come out on a periodic basis. We're always on top of these rule changes that are coming out, either whether it's federal, state, or local regulations that they need to stay compliant with.
Michael, thanks so much for taking the time today to explain this. It's a little bit of a confusing topic, but very important. There's so much for manufacturers to be thinking about. This is not one of those things that they want to let slide, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Eric, thank you so much for your time.